With us is Tony Pearce, Director General of Emergency Management Australia. Tony, most people think about terrorism in terms of threats to national security. So where do natural disasters fit in?
I think you're right. Traditionally, people have thought of terrorism being the primary issue in a national security sense. However, natural disasters have very similar impacts both on the economy, on the psychology of the nation, on the business sector and on communities generally. So ultimately, there's very little difference, I think, between the two. And nowadays, it's generally seen that the natural disasters are as big an issue in the national security context as terrorism events are.
What is Emergency Management Australia's role in relation to managing natural risks to the community and environment?
Our role falls into two quite distinct areas. We've got the pre-emergency phase where we work with communities and governments and schools and so on actually identifying risks and then developing strategies and publications and education programs to help address those. And then in the advent of an emergency occurring where a state or a territory is affected and they need assistance over and above their own capacity, then we coordinate the Australian government response to that and work with them to be able to respond to the emergency.
I understand one of Emergency Management Australia's objectives is to develop community resilience. What do you mean by this and what has to be done?
This whole concept of resilience as a whole, people have many different definitions of it, but I think if I was to encapsulate what we're talking about, it's actually trying to get the community to a situation where they are able to bounce back from adversity. So when an impact occurs, they are well prepared and able to bounce back from that event. It means that it's communities working with government in partnership. It means it's the government working with the private sector and with non-government organisations in a collective sense to have people understand their risk, to be prepared to deal with the event, and once the issue's passed, to be able to recover from it and to come back to a stage of some sort of standard of decent operational function as a community.
State agencies like police, ambulance and fire services are the first to respond to disasters. What's the Commonwealth relationship with these agencies?
It's actually a very close working relationship, and you asked before about EMA's role in responding, particularly in the coordinating the government response aspect of it. We work with individual agencies and governments themselves on a day-to-day basis right across the spectrum of emergency management. So our relationships are extremely sound, and that partnership that we have means that when there is something going on, we're able to adequately support the states and territories, even though the constitutional responsibility for responding to the event still rests with them.
Finally, Tony Pearce, what will you be emphasising in your presentation to the 7th Annual National Security Australia 2009 Conference in Sydney on the 23rd and 24th of March?
There's a number of things that I'm hoping to cover in the presentation. One, I want to have a look at this concept of all hazards emergency management, which looks at the terrorism event as well as the natural disasters and where the synergies are between, or the similarities between those. I want to look at some of the potential consequences of the future risks that we're facing, such as climate change and adapting to climate change and how that's going to impact on emergency management and responding. I want to have a look at some lessons that we've identified from some recent events and consider whether or not there are some potential things that we can pick up from those, and also a little bit looking at the community resilience issue and just have a slightly more in-depth look at the issues around that.
Tony, thanks for talking with us, and we look forward to your presentation at the conference.
Great pleasure. Thanks very much indeed.